Ever since Malcolm Gladwell popularized the so-called 10,000-hour rule in 2008, people have been arguing over how many practice hours it really takes for someone to reach expert levels of performance. As a result, nearly everyone missed the point of the research that Gladwell was drawing from. That research, published back in 1993, was far more focused on how elite performers achieve their greatness, not so much on how long it takes. Lucky for us, that research produced some very useful results. It showed that the main thing that separates champions from the rest of us is a habit of deliberate practice. Hours count, of course, but they don't count nearly as much as how you spend them. Too often, what most of us call practice is just engaging in the activity in question. We assume, for instance, that putting in a lot of hours on the basketball court will prep us for the NBA, and that putting in hours playing the guitar will turn us into shredders. And while it's true that some practice is better than no practice, there's an enormous difference between practicing deliberately and simply logging hours. Deliberate practice means working on skills that are a little above your current level of ability, instead of simply rehearsing the skills that you're already good at. It also means identifying your weak areas and targeting them during your practice time. Not many people do that. Consider this. There are undoubtedly thousands of basketball players who, by the age of 20, had put in just as many on-court hours as Michael Jordan or LeBron James had by the time they were 20. But those thousands of other guys didn't become basketball legends. Why not? Because those thousands of other guys spent most of their time playing the game, whereas Jordan, James, and the other NBA elites spent a much larger portion of their time targeting their weak areas. Until they no longer had any. When I first stumbled onto this research, it really resonated with me because over the course of my life, I have wasted a lot of valuable practice time not practicing. And I'm not even talking about the time I wasted watching TV. Back when I was just a little musician, I spent most of my so-called practice time playing through a handful of Beatles songs over and over. I called that practicing, but what I was really doing was rehearsing material I already knew. Truth be told, I was just daydreaming, playing easy and familiar pop tunes while imagining myself performing in front of an adoring audience. None of the time I spent doing that was making me a better musician. So don't make my mistake. Know these terms and start using them correctly. Practice is systematically attempting to perform a skill that you're not currently good at. Rehearsal is performing a skill you've already mastered. Practice is what you do to get better. Rehearsal is what you do to make sure you've memorized material for a live performance. The only time it's acceptable to spend more time rehearsing than practicing is when you've got a performance coming up in the very near future. Well, do you, punk? If you intend to level up as a musician, or as a basketball player, or a hula dancer, or anything else, you need to arrange your practice schedule so that you're spending way more of your time practicing deliberately than you're spending rehearsing what's already comfortable and familiar. I'm about to show you the precise steps to follow in order to get the most out of your practice time. But before I get to those steps, here are some general but very important principles of effective practice. Principle 1. Practice with a metronome or a rhythm track more often than not. If music has a useful definition, it is sounds organized in time. Unfortunately, for every 10 musicians I see working on their sound, I only see 1 or 2 seriously working on their timing. And that's crazy. You wouldn't call yourself a painter if you just mixed paints and enjoyed gazing at the pretty colors all day, right? No, because you're not a painter until you start organizing those colors on a surface. Just like you're not a sculptor until you start organizing material into shapes. So now think about how many hours most guitarists spend turning knobs on their amps and adjusting sliders on their pedals to get their tone just right versus how many hours they spend on skills related to rhythm. If that's you, get your head out of your amp. If you're not constantly reinforcing your sense of tempo with a metronome or a rhythm track, you're going to suck in live performances. You'll develop the habit of changing tempo when it's not called for, and without realizing it, you'll be slowing down when you reach challenging passages, and then speeding up again in familiar sections. Do that and you're not going to be able to keep time with other musicians. And that means they're not going to let you play in their reindeer games. Besides, a metronome is a great way to keep track of your progress. You don't have to use it all the time, but way more often than not. Principle 2. Train yourself to play through your mistakes. Our natural tendency when we screw up is to stop and start over. A lot of us even stop, apologize, and then start over. That's a disastrous habit. If you do it in practice or during your lessons, you'll do it automatically during performances, and you must never do that during performances. Audiences will tolerate and even fail to notice the occasional missed note or forgotten lyric. But stopping a piece of music or even just breaking the rhythm for a beat is jaw-droppingly obvious and utterly cringeworthy. Audiences hate it, most likely because they can't pretend they didn't hear it. It's like an audible fart in an elevator. It has to be acknowledged. So whenever you practice or take a lesson, force yourself to play through your mistakes until doing that becomes your habit. Principle 3. Remember that practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Whatever you do repeatedly, whether it's good or bad, gets ingrained as habit. Therefore, anytime you find yourself making the same or similar mistake during practice, stop and identify the problem. Then begin working carefully on that section of the piece or that particular technique in isolation at a much slower tempo. Once you're able to play it consistently without mistakes, slowly ramp your way back up to performance speed. If you don't correct your mistakes early, they'll be yours for life. Principle 4. Keep records of your progress, preferably videos. Learning any new skill is a race between satisfaction and frustration. When you don't feel like you're making progress at something, you'll get discouraged and spend less time practicing. That leads to even less progress and more discouragement, which leads to less practicing, and it goes on, spiraling into a vicious cycle. But the opposite is also true. Progress begets progress. Reaching a goal gives you the reward of satisfaction, also known as the dopamine hit, which encourages more practice, which brings more satisfaction, etc., etc., in what's called a virtuous cycle. The only catch is, with music, it's often very hard to appreciate your own progress because the changes are usually slow and incremental. Keeping records is often the only way to clearly see that you're advancing. If you don't keep records, then you're denying yourself those little rushes of gratification that will keep you engaged and moving forward. Athletes get great satisfaction from looking back at their old personal best to see how far they've come. Likewise, I enjoy looking back over my notes and seeing that I used to crash on a particular piano solo at 100 beats per minute, and now I breeze through it at 180. It's like going back to the beginner slope after you've been an intermediate skier for a while. That bunny slope used to terrify you, and now it looks as level as a pool table. That's deeply gratifying to a skier, so make sure you're reaping the same gratification as a musician by tracking your progress. Video is the best way to do this. For one thing, your phone is probably always handy. Just make sure that you're date stamping your recordings. Another reason video is best is because it will give you brutally honest feedback about the things you can't see when you're practicing, like your posture and your technique. Video also gives you feedback about the things you can't hear. That's right, you usually can't hear yourself accurately during a good practice session because you're concentrating so hard on too many things at once. But during video playback, you'll not only hear missed notes, you'll also hear all those guitar strings that are buzzing because of your clumsy fingering, along with the ones that are still ringing out because you failed to mute them. Or you'll notice those piano notes that are bleeding into each other because you're not fully releasing the sustain pedal. You may even catch yourself grunting or wincing in unflattering ways during difficult passages, and you'll miss all of that stuff if you don't record yourself. And remember principle 3, practice makes permanent. Video will help you catch your mistakes and silly faces before you commit them all to muscle memory. Principle 5, less is more. You know how it is. You finally find some time to sit down to practice, and that's when Commissioner Gordon sends up the bat signal. It's always something, right? Unless you're highly self-disciplined, and most people aren't, you're going to find that reasons to skip practice abound. There's always something that seems more pressing. Well, if you're serious about leveling up as a musician, you have to prioritize at least some practice time every day. So I recommend committing yourself to short sessions. I've known people who say it's not worth picking up their instrument unless they have at least an hour of practice time available. And most of them are not very good musicians. They rarely practice because they've given themselves a monumental obstacle to overcome. So instead of that, tell yourself that you're going to give it 10 or 15 minutes every day, and then it won't seem so scary to pick up your instrument. You can always go longer when you have the time or the inspiration, but at least give yourself the best chance you can of getting in a little practice every day. In addition, there's a lot of scientific evidence that your brain continues to process things even when you don't think you're paying attention to them. And that's especially true for things that you concentrate on frequently. If you practice daily and deliberately, even in short bursts, You're letting your brain know that you want it to keep working on music even when you're not physically practicing. Do that and you'll start having more and more of those magical experiences where you can suddenly play something that was giving you fits just yesterday. Your brain has an autopilot feature, and you can engage it by focusing on music for at least a few minutes every day. Principle 6. Start each practice session with your most challenging material. Eat your veggies first. Treat yourself to dessert afterwards if you have time. Most people start with the easy stuff, telling themselves it's a good way to warm up. That's bullshit. Do it that way and you'll end up wasting your day's allotment of practice time rehearsing instead of practicing. If you truly want to level up, start with the hard stuff, even if you only work on it for 5 minutes. That way, if your practice time gets cut short for some reason, you will have spent what little time you had that day making forward progress instead of running in place. When I'm working on something that's especially challenging, I go at it twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening, but only for about 10 minutes at a shot. Sometimes life gets in the way, and that's all the time I'll get for music that day. On other days, I'll do quite a bit more practicing on top of that, maybe even some rehearsing. But I'll always begin with that 5 or 10 minutes on the most challenging material. The trick is to not bang your head so hard against the tough stuff that you don't want to do it anymore. But at the same time, you need to work on it frequently enough that you're seeing progress. Principle 7. Last one, I promise. Turn off the effects when you're practicing. Nothing hides sloppy technique like growling distortion, spacey delay, and heavy washes of reverb. Use those effects as much and as often as you want during rehearsals and performances, but shut them off during practice. That even goes for the sustain pedal on pianos. Lift that foot from time to time and play through those challenging passages without sustain, even if sustain is called for in the music. You will be shocked at how many bad notes have been hiding there all along under the wash of good ones. What's even more likely is that you'll realize that you're not even playing some notes. In particularly fast passages, it's easy to accidentally skim over some of the piano keys so rapidly that the note doesn't even sound. And that's something you won't catch if you're flooring the sustain pedal. Okay, let's get to the specific steps now. Don't panic. This list is shorter and simpler than the principles.